My sister locked my 12-year-old daughter out in the cold while I was away. I called my mom, but she told me to find a new home. So I stripped the house bare, cut off all my money, and left them to drown. I never thought I would find myself sitting here again. My hands were gripped so tightly around the steering wheel of my car that my knuckles had turned completely white. I was 36 years old, a grown woman, a mother, a professional, yet looking at the chipped white paint on my parents' front porch made me feel exactly like a helpless teenager all over again. The engine was still running, the low hum vibrating through the floorboards, and I seriously considered throwing the car into reverse and driving away. My name is Clara. For the last couple of years, my life had been peaceful, predictable, and totally mine. I had a beautiful 9-year-old daughter named Maya. I shared custody with my ex-husband, Colin. Our divorce was one of the rare good ones, amicable and respectful, built entirely around making sure Maya grew up feeling loved and secure. I had a career I was proud of, an apartment I owned free and clear thanks to a modest inheritance from my late grandmother, and a solid routine. I did not need the ghosts of my past pulling me backward. But then the phone call came. It was my mother. Her voice had sounded thin, panicked, and desperate. She had begged me to come over, claiming it was an absolute emergency. She wouldn't tell me what it was over the phone, only that she and my father needed me immediately. I had rushed to drop Maya off at my best friend Fiona's house, kissing my daughter on the forehead and promising her I would only be a couple of hours. Now, sitting in their driveway, the weight of history pressed down on my chest. I hadn't stepped foot in this house or spoken a meaningful word to my parents since my grandmother's funeral 3 years ago. And before that? The rail break happened 18 years ago. Sitting in the car, I closed my eyes, and the memory played out as sharply as if it had happened yesterday. I was 18. It was the end of summer, just weeks before I was supposed to leave for college. I had spent all of high school working double shifts. I waited tables, I folded clothes at a retail store, I babysat every weekend. Every single dollar went into a joint savings account my parents had helped me set up when I was a minor. It was my college fund. It was my ticket out, my future, my independence. I remember walking into the local bank branch to check my balance, feeling so incredibly proud of myself. I handed my ID to the teller, a sweet older lady, and asked for a printed statement. When she slid the piece of paper across the counter, I stared at it in pure confusion. The balance said $0. Not 100, not 10. 0. I thought there had been a computer error. I remember my voice shaking as I asked the teller to check again. She looked at her screen, her expression turning into one of deep pity. She told me the funds had been withdrawn the previous afternoon by the primary account holder. My father. I had run home, my lungs burning, throwing open the front door of this very house. I found my parents in the kitchen, looking over fabric swatches for my older sister Vanessa's wedding. Vanessa was the golden child, the beautiful, perfect daughter who could do no wrong. She was marrying Derek, a man who thought very highly of himself and demanded a wedding that looked like it belonged in a magazine. When I screamed, asking where my money was, my mother didn't even look guilty. She just sighed, as if I was being an inconvenience. She told me, calmly and coldly, that Vanessa needed a proper wedding to secure her future with Derek. She said I was smart, that I could easily take out student loans like everyone else, but Vanessa's big day was a once-in-a-lifetime event. They had taken every single cent of my hard-earned money to pay for an ice sculpture, a live band, and an open bar for hundreds of guests. I left that afternoon with a single duffel bag. My grandmother took me in, helped me pay for community college, and I built my life from scratch. I survived. I thrived. But the wound never fully closed. And now, they needed me. Taking a deep breath, I turned off the engine. I stepped out into the crisp afternoon air, the dry leaves crunching under my boots, and walked toward the front door. I told myself I was strong. I told myself I was just going to listen, say no, and leave. I had no idea what was actually waiting for me inside. The porch steps groaned under my weight, the exact same creak I remembered from my childhood. I didn't bother knocking. I just turned the knob and pushed the door open. The first thing that hit me was the smell. It was a stale mixture of my mother's cheap vanilla air freshener, old coffee, and a deep, unsettling mustiness. The house felt entirely different from the pristine, overly decorated shrine it used to be during Vanessa's reign. The wallpaper in the hallway was peeling at the corners, and the carpet looked worn and gray. My mother emerged from the kitchen, and for a split second, my breath caught in my throat. She looked so old. Her hair was completely gray, unstyled and limp, and the lines around her mouth were carved deep with stress. My father stood right behind her, his shoulders slumped, his face pale. They looked like two people who had not slept a full night in months. They ushered me into the living room. I noticed the furniture immediately. It was the wildly expensive, custom-upholstered living room set they had purchased right after Vanessa's wedding, supposedly to entertain Derek's wealthy family. Now, the cushions were sagging, and the fabric was stained. I refused to sit down. I stood by the fireplace, crossing my arms over my chest, waiting. I asked them point-blank why they had called me here, ruining my afternoon with my daughter. My mother immediately burst into tears. These weren't the quiet, manipulative tears I was used to from her. These were ugly, full-body sobs. My father put a trembling arm around her shoulder and finally looked me in the eye. He told me they were going to lose the house. I stood perfectly still, letting the words hang in the heavy air. I asked him how that was possible. My father had a decent pension, and their mortgage should have been paid off years ago. My father looked at the floor, too ashamed to meet my gaze, and mumbled the name I knew was coming. Vanessa. It turned out that Derek, Vanessa's perfect husband, had started a business a few years back. The business was failing miserably. Vanessa, crying and pleading, had convinced my parents to take out a massive second mortgage on their home to bail Derek out. They used this very house as collateral to secure a loan for tens of thousands of dollars. They handed the money straight to Derek. I let out a harsh, bitter laugh that echoed in the quiet room. I asked them to tell me the punchline. I asked if Derek's business went under anyway. My mother nodded, wiping her face with a tissue. She said the business went bankrupt. Vanessa and Derek were drowning in their own debt. They had stopped making the loan payments to my parents months ago. Now, the bank was threatening foreclosure. My parents could not cover the massive monthly payments on their fixed income. They were weeks away from being thrown out onto the street. I looked at these two people. The same people who had stolen my future to pay for a party, now begging me to save them from a disaster created by the exact same golden child. I asked them why they didn't ask Vanessa for help. My mother snapped, a brief flash of her old defensive self returning. She said Vanessa had it hard enough, that she had two young children, Hazel and Wyatt, to worry about, and that Derek was becoming difficult. She then looked at me, her eyes pleading. She told me they knew I was doing well. They knew I owned my apartment outright. They knew I had a good job. They wanted me to pay the loan. The sheer audacity of it made my blood boil. I wanted to scream at them. I wanted to list every single night I ate instant noodles in my tiny dorm room while Vanessa posted photos of her lavish vacations. I wanted to tell them to rot. But then an image flashed in my mind. Maya. Maya was 9 years old, and she had never known what it was like to have grandparents. Colin's parents had passed away before she was born, and mine were estranged. Whenever Maya saw her friends at school getting picked up by their grandparents, baking cookies, or having family dinners, I saw the quiet longing in her eyes. I had always felt guilty that my traumatic past had robbed her of that extended family experience. I looked at my parents again. They were broken, desperate people. A crazy, dangerous thought began to form in my mind. If I helped them, I would hold all the power. I could dictate the terms. And maybe, just maybe, I could give Maya the grand family experience she deserved. Maybe this was a chance to fix the broken narrative of my life. I took a deep breath, dropping my arms to my sides. I told them I would not just hand them cash. I told them I would rent out my apartment and use that rental income to cover their loan payments and their utility bills. But in exchange, Maya and I were moving in. I would take control of the household finances. This was going to be my house run my way. My mother looked stunned, then overwhelmed with relief. She rushed forward and hugged me, crying and thanking me over and over. I stood there, stiff as a board, feeling absolutely nothing from her embrace. I had made a bargain, and I only hoped I wouldn't regret it. The next month was an absolute whirlwind of logistics, stress, and massive changes. Renting out my apartment was surprisingly easy. Because it was located in a highly desirable neighborhood, my real estate agent found a reliable young couple to sign a long-term lease within a week. The monthly rent they paid was substantial, more than enough to cover my parents' crushing loan payments, with a little left over for groceries and utilities. Packing up the life Maya and I had built in that apartment was much harder. Maya was confused at first. I sat her down on her bedroom floor, surrounded by cardboard boxes, and explained that we were going to live with her grandparents for a while so we could help them out. I watched her face carefully. First, there was hesitation, but then a slow, radiant smile spread across her face. She asked if she would finally get to play in a real backyard, and if her grandmother would teach her how to knit like she had seen on television. Seeing that pure, innocent excitement solidified my decision. I was doing this entirely for her. Moving into the house was a shock to my system. Now that I was living there, the reality of my parents' decline was undeniable. Things were falling apart. The refrigerator in the kitchen was ancient, leaking water onto the linoleum floor and ruining the baseboards. The washing machine sounded like a jet engine preparing for takeoff and barely got the clothes clean. My father complained constantly about his lower back, a result of spending hours hunched over the sink hand-washing dishes because the dishwasher had broken 5 years ago and they never bothered to fix it. I decided immediately that if Maya and I were living here, we were going to live decently. I took a portion of my own savings, money I had worked incredibly hard for, and went to an appliance store. I did not hold back. I bought a brand new, top-of-the-line refrigerator with a built-in ice maker, which Maya thought was the greatest invention on earth. I bought a silent, high-capacity washer and dryer set. And most importantly, I bought a premium dishwasher. I will never forget the day the delivery crew brought everything in. My parents stood in the kitchen, completely speechless. When I handed the delivery men my credit card, signing away thousands of dollars, I felt a strange sense of ownership. I was no longer the discarded daughter. I was the provider. I was the one keeping this roof over their heads and food in their bellies. The transition took some time, but slowly, a new rhythm established itself in the house. And to my absolute shock, it was actually wonderful. My mother, perhaps fueled by gratitude or guilt, stepped up in a way I had never seen before. Every morning, before I even had to leave for work, I would wake up to the smell of fresh coffee and bacon. She started making breakfast for everyone. She would pack Maya's lunchbox with little handwritten notes tucked inside. In the afternoons, my mother took over the school pickups, bringing Maya back home and sitting with her at the kitchen table to help with her math homework. They even started baking together on weekends. The house constantly smelled of vanilla extract and warm sugar. My father changed, too. With the new dishwasher handling the kitchen cleanup, his chronic back pain practically vanished. He had more energy. He dug an old, beautifully carved wooden chess set out of the attic, dusted it off, and taught Maya how to play. Sunday afternoons became their sacred time. I would sit in the living room, reading a book, listening to the soft clack of chess pieces and my father's booming laugh when Maya managed to outsmart him. Seeing Maya so incredibly happy, so surrounded by attention and love, made every financial sacrifice feel entirely worth it. I felt a deep, healing warmth in my chest. I started to believe that people could change. I started to believe that the trauma of my past was finally being overwritten by this beautiful present. I let my guard down. That was my first major mistake. 3 entire years passed in this comfortable, steady routine. Maya grew from a bright-eyed 9-year-old into a thoughtful, intelligent 12-year-old. She was thriving. Her grades were perfect, she joined the school debate team, and she had a solid group of friends. The house felt like a real home. Because I had built in childcare and a stable home environment, I was finally able to pour more of my energy into my career. I worked at a large corporate logistics firm. For years, I had held a mid-level administrative role because I needed the strict hours to be present for Maya. But now, with my parents handling the afternoon school runs and the cooking, I started taking on bigger projects. I stayed late when needed. I volunteered to manage complex client accounts. My hard work did not go unnoticed. My boss, Mrs. Harrington, a sharp, no-nonsense woman who valued efficiency above all else, called me into her office one rainy Tuesday morning. She offered me a massive promotion. She wanted me to become the regional accounts manager. It came with a significant salary increase, excellent benefits, and a lot of prestige within the company. There was only one catch. The new role required regular business trips. I would have to travel to different states, sometimes being away from home for 3 to 5 days at a time. In my past life, in my small apartment, I would have declined the offer immediately. A single mother with no support system cannot just hop on a plane to Chicago for a week. But now, I had a safety net. I remember sitting at the dinner table that night, nervously bringing up the promotion to my parents and Maya. I explained the travel requirements, expecting hesitation. Instead, my parents were overwhelmingly supportive. My mother waved her hand dismissively, telling me not to worry about a single thing, promising they would take perfect care of Maya. My father beamed with pride. Even Maya told me I should take it, saying she would be fine and that we could video chat every night. So, I accepted the position. Life became busier, but richer. The money I was making allowed me to put even more away into a new, heavily protected college fund for Maya. I was determined that my daughter would never experience the financial betrayal I had. The first time I had to travel for work, a 3-day conference in Denver, I was a nervous wreck. I texted my mother constantly from the airport, from the hotel, from the conference hall. But every time, my mother sent back pictures of Maya smiling, eating dinner, or playing chess with my father. It was working. The arrangement was flawless. I was successfully balancing a high-powered career while providing my daughter with a loving, multi-generational home. I felt invincible. I felt like I had finally won the game of life. I had taken a broken situation and turned it into a masterpiece of family healing. But looking back now, I realize I was completely blind to the subtle, toxic currents flowing right beneath the surface. I was so busy looking at the beautiful picture we had painted that I completely ignored the frame rotting away. There were small moments, tiny red flags that I brushed off because confronting them would ruin the peace. I would sometimes come down to the kitchen late at night for a glass of water and find my mother standing by the window, speaking in hushed, frantic whispers on her cell phone. Whenever I walked in, she would abruptly hang up, her eyes red and puffy, and quickly change the subject. Then there were the conversations I would overhear between my parents when they thought I was not listening. They would whisper about Derek, about how reckless he was, about how Vanessa was struggling to keep up appearances. I chose to ignore it. I told myself it was none of my business as long as they were treating Maya well and my money was paying the mortgage. I was paying the price for peace, and for 3 years, I got exactly what I paid for. Until the day the illusion shattered entirely. The unraveling began on a random Thursday evening. I had just returned from a very successful 2-day trip to Atlanta. I was exhausted, my feet aching in my work heels, but I was in a great mood. I had closed a major account for Mrs. Harrington, and I was looking forward to surprising Maya with a souvenir I had bought at the airport. When I walked into the house, it was unusually quiet. Maya was upstairs at her desk, studying for a history test. My father was asleep in his recliner in the living room, the television playing a muted sports game. My mother was nowhere to be seen. I walked into the kitchen to grab a bottle of water. My mother's tablet was sitting on the kitchen island, plugged into the charger. The screen was lit up unlocked. I normally would never snoop. I respected privacy. But as I reached past the tablet to grab a napkin, the large, bold text on the screen caught my eye. It was a banking application. I froze. I recognized the interface. It was the joint checking account I had set up with my parents to manage the household expenses. Every month, I deposited the rental income from my apartment and a hefty portion of my own salary into this exact account to cover the mortgage, the utilities, the property taxes, and the grocery budget. I looked closer at the screen. It was a transaction confirmation page. The text was glaring, mocking me in bright digital letters. It confirmed a completed transfer of a very large sum of money. The recipient name was crystal clear, Vanessa. My heart slammed against my ribs. I picked up the tablet, my fingers trembling slightly as I scrolled through the transaction history. It wasn't just one transfer. There were dozens of them. Going back months. Every single week, my mother was siphoning off chunks of the grocery budget, the utility reserves, and the maintenance funds, and wiring the cash directly into Vanessa's bank account. My vision actually blurred for a second. The money I earned by working late nights, the money generated by my grandmother's apartment, the money meant to keep this roof over our heads, was secretly funding the lifestyle of the exact same sister whose financial irresponsibility had almost made them homeless in the first place. I heard footsteps behind me. I spun around to see my mother walking into the kitchen, carrying an empty laundry basket. When she saw me holding her tablet, all the color drained from her face. She dropped the basket, and it hit the linoleum with a loud clatter. I didn't yell. My voice was dangerously quiet, cold as ice. I held the tablet up and asked her to explain exactly what I was looking at. My mother immediately went on the defensive, the sweet, baking grandmother vanishing in an instant, replaced by the manipulative woman from my teenage years. She rushed forward, trying to snatch the tablet out of my hands, but I stepped back, glaring at her. She started stammering, telling me that I did not understand the situation. She said Vanessa was going through a terrible time. She said Derek had become verbally aggressive, that he was refusing to pay for Hazel and Wyatt's extracurricular activities, and that Vanessa barely had enough money to buy decent clothes for the kids. I stared at her in absolute disbelief. I asked her how it was remotely fair that I was literally paying the massive loan that Vanessa and Derek had defaulted on, paying all the household bills, buying all the food, and yet she was stealing my money to send to the golden child. My mother's face hardened. She crossed her arms, raising her chin. She told me I was being incredibly selfish. She said I had plenty of money, that my new promotion meant I was rich, and that family was supposed to help family. She actually looked me in the eye and said Vanessa deserved some financial support because she was dealing with a failing marriage, while my life was so perfectly easy. I felt a physical pain in my chest, a deep, sickening ache. I reminded her, my voice finally rising, that I had a child to feed, too. I reminded her of the college fund she stole from me. My mother waved her hand in the air, a gesture of ultimate dismissal. She said the past was in the past, and that I needed to stop holding grudges. She told me to let it go, turned her back on me, and walked out of the kitchen, leaving me standing there with the tablet in my hands. In that moment, standing alone in the kitchen I had furnished, paying for the house I had saved, I realized nothing had changed. The 3 years of peace were nothing but a transaction. I was not their beloved daughter. I was just the current bank they were drawing from to support Vanessa. The illusion was dead. And little did I know, the real nightmare was just about to walk through the front door. Please like the video, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment with the name of the city you live in. Every comment helps the video reach more viewers. Thank you so much. The uneasy truce I had forced myself into completely shattered just 2 weeks after I found those bank transfers. It was a miserable, rainy Wednesday. I had spent 10 hours at the office putting out fires for Mrs. Harrington, and all I wanted was to come home, take off my damp coat, and eat a quiet dinner with my daughter. Instead, I opened the front door and walked straight into absolute chaos. The first thing that hit me was the noise. The television in the living room was blasting at top volume, playing a chaotic cartoon. Over the blaring speakers, 2 children were screaming and chasing each other through the hallway. I recognized them immediately from photographs. It was Hazel, who was 10, and Wyatt, who was 6. The second thing that hit me was the smell. It was a suffocating cloud of expensive, heavy floral perfume, the kind that costs hundreds of dollars a bottle, mixed with the sharp odor of unwashed clothes. I dropped my briefcase by the door and walked slowly into the living room. It looked like a bomb had gone off. There were massive, expensive hardshell suitcases exploded open all over the floor, spilling clothes everywhere. Fast food wrappers and half-empty juice boxes littered my custom-upholstered sofa. And right in the middle of it all, sprawled across the largest couch cushion, scrolling mindlessly on her phone, was Vanessa. She did not look like a woman whose life had just fallen apart. She was wearing a silk lounge set, her nails were freshly manicured, and she looked up at me with the exact same expression of bored entitlement she had worn when we were teenagers. She barely even registered my presence. She just sighed, casually waved a hand in my general direction, and announced that she had officially left Derek. She said he was a complete loser, that he was utterly useless, and that she and the kids would be staying here from now on. She delivered this information as if she were commenting on the weather, entirely unbothered by the fact that she was invading the home I was financially keeping afloat. My parents were hovering nervously in the kitchen doorway. My mother wouldn't even look me in the eye. My father was wringing his hands, looking completely overwhelmed. Neither of them said a single word about the mess, the noise, or the fact that my sanctuary had just been hijacked. I stood there, staring at Vanessa. I asked her, very clearly, if she planned on paying rent, considering I was currently covering the mortgage she and Derek had defaulted on. Vanessa rolled her eyes so hard I thought they might get stuck in her head. She sneered and called me Miss Perfect, mocking my job and my money. She said some people had actual problems, like going through a traumatic divorce, and that I was being incredibly insensitive for bringing up money at a time like this. Before I could tear into her, my mother rushed forward, putting her hands on my arms, pleading with me to keep my voice down. She gave me the same tired speech. We are family. We have to stick together in difficult times. Vanessa needs a safe harbor. I pulled my arms away from my mother, feeling a cold wave of disgust wash over me. I told them all that this was a disaster waiting to happen. But I was trapped. I couldn't just throw them out without breaking my mother's heart, and more importantly, I didn't want to uproot Maya again. I decided to retreat to my bedroom, locking the door behind me. I told myself I just needed to establish boundaries. I had no idea that boundaries meant absolutely nothing to a golden parasite. The next 2 months were a slow, agonizing descent into hell. Vanessa did not look for a job. She did not help with the cooking. She did not clean up after her children. She treated my parents' house like an all-inclusive resort where she was the VIP guest and the rest of us were the staff. The financial drain was immediate and severe. Our grocery bill tripled. The water and electricity usage skyrocketed. But the money was not what kept me awake at night. What broke my heart, piece by piece, day by day, was watching what this invasion was doing to my daughter. Almost overnight, Maya became a ghost in her own home. The shift in my parents' behavior was so drastic it gave me whiplash. The beautiful, attentive grandparents I had bought and paid for vanished, replaced by 2 people entirely consumed by Vanessa's children. Hazel and Wyatt were loud, demanding, and completely undisciplined, and my parents scrambled to cater to their every whim. I will never forget the Sunday afternoon I walked into the living room, expecting to hear the familiar clack of chess pieces. Instead, I saw my father putting on his jacket to go out to the backyard. Maya was sitting at the table, the wooden chessboard perfectly set up, holding her favorite knight piece. She asked him if they were going to play. My father sighed heavily, rubbing his neck, and told her he was far too tired for a game that required so much thinking. 10 minutes later, I looked out the kitchen window and saw him running around the yard, playing an energetic game of catch with Wyatt for 2 solid hours. I watched Maya quietly pack the chess pieces back into their velvet box, her shoulders slumped. It physically hurt to watch. It wasn't just my father. My mother was worse. One evening, Maya came downstairs absolutely glowing with pride. She had scored a perfect 100% on her most difficult math exam. She held the paper out to my mother, waiting for the praise she was used to getting. My mother barely glanced at it. She swatted Maya's hand away, completely distracted, saying she didn't have time to look at papers because she was busy trying to get Hazel to eat her vegetables. Maya's smile died instantly. She folded the test, put it in her pocket, and walked back upstairs without eating dinner. I confronted my mother that very night. I backed her into the kitchen counter and demanded to know why she was treating my daughter like an invisible nuisance. My mother had the nerve to act offended. She told me I was being ridiculous. She justified it by saying Maya was 12 years old, she was mature, and she didn't need constant coddling. She said Hazel and Wyatt were from a broken home and needed extra love and support to heal. I was furious. I reminded her that Maya was from a broken home too, but she had never acted like a feral animal. My mother just shook her head, dismissing me entirely, and rushed upstairs because Vanessa was calling her to bring up a glass of wine. I was paying for this house. I was paying for the food Hazel and Wyatt were eating. And in return, my daughter was being cast aside, forced to watch the grandparents she loved shower all their affection on her cousins. I was watching history repeat itself in real time, and the guilt of putting Maya in this situation was eating me alive. The tension in the house was a ticking time bomb, and it finally detonated on a Friday afternoon. I had managed to leave the office a few hours early. I wanted to surprise Maya, take her out for ice cream, and get her out of that suffocating environment for a little while. As I pulled my car into the driveway, I could hear screaming coming from inside the house. Not the usual chaotic screaming of the kids playing, but harsh, angry, adult screaming. I threw the front door open and sprinted down the hallway toward the living room. The sight that greeted me made my blood run instantly cold. Maya was on her hands and knees on the living room floor. She was holding a garbage bag, frantically picking up hundreds of tiny plastic building blocks that Wyatt had scattered everywhere. Standing right over her, pointing a finger and screaming at the top of her lungs, was Vanessa. Vanessa was calling my 12-year-old daughter a lazy, ungrateful brat. She was yelling that Maya thought she was a princess who was too good to help out around the house. I didn't even think. Motherly instinct took over entirely. I threw my purse against the wall, grabbed Vanessa by the shoulder, and shoved her away from my daughter. I stood in front of Maya, shielding her, and screamed at Vanessa, asking her what the hell she thought she was doing. Vanessa stumbled back, her face twisting into an ugly sneer. She yelled right back at me, complaining that Wyatt had tripped over a toy, and that since I was never home, someone had to keep my precious daughter in line and teach her how to clean up. I completely lost my mind. I told Vanessa that those were her son's toys, not Maya's. I asked her where she got the audacity to treat my child like a maid while she laid on the couch all day doing absolutely nothing. I called her a parasite. I told her she was a failure of a mother who couldn't even manage her own children, let alone discipline mine. The noise brought my parents running down the stairs. The moment they entered the room, Vanessa burst into theatrical tears. She collapsed onto the sofa, sobbing loudly, claiming that I had physically attacked her and that I was constantly bullying her and making her feel unwelcome in her own family home. And right on cue, without asking a single question, without looking at Maya who was trembling behind me, my parents sided with Vanessa. My father told me I was out of line. My mother rushed to Vanessa, wrapping her arms around her, glaring at me like I was a monster. She told me that Maya was the oldest child in the house, and she needed to learn responsibility. She said asking Maya to pick up a few toys was not the end of the world, and that I was creating unnecessary drama. I looked at the three of them, the golden child and her dedicated protectors. Then I looked down at Maya, who was silently crying, looking at the floor. I didn't argue anymore. There was no point in arguing with a brick wall. I took Maya by the hand, led her upstairs to our room, and locked the door. I sat her on the bed, hugged her tightly, and apologized for bringing her here. I promised her right then and there that we were leaving. I told her I would figure out the logistics and we would move back to our own apartment as soon as the current tenant's lease was up in a few months. We just needed to survive a little bit longer. But fate had a much crueler timeline in mind. The very next week, the universe decided to test exactly how much I could endure. Mrs. Harrington called me into her office on a Monday morning. A massive client account based in Seattle was threatening to pull their business due to a logistical failure. She needed someone on the ground, immediately, to salvage the relationship. She looked at me, her top regional manager, and told me I was booked on a flight the following morning. I had to be in Seattle for 5 full days. Panic gripped my throat. I told her I couldn't go. I told her I had a family emergency. But Mrs. Harrington was firm. This was the job I had accepted, the job that paid my substantial salary, and if the account failed, heads would roll. I had no choice. I drove home that evening feeling physically sick. The thought of leaving Maya alone in that house with Vanessa and my entirely compromised parents terrified me. I packed my suitcase with trembling hands. I sat Maya down on my bed and handed her a crisp $100 bill. I told her to hide it in her phone case. I gave her strict instructions. I told her to go to school, do her homework in her room, and avoid Vanessa at all costs. I told her not to argue, not to engage, and just to stay invisible until I got back. Maya tried to act brave. She gave me a tight hug and promised she would be perfectly fine. She said her phone was fully charged and that we could video chat every single night before bed. The next morning, my mother drove me to the airport. During the ride, she gave me a lecture about how I needed to be more forgiving toward Vanessa, completely ignoring the fact that I was leaving for a trip to earn the money that paid her mortgage. I just stared out the window, counting down the hours until I could return. Seattle was exactly how I felt inside, cold, gray, and miserably damp. The client meetings were grueling, lasting 10 to 12 hours a day. But no matter how exhausted I was, the moment I got back to my hotel room, I called Maya. For the first 3 days, things seemed tense but manageable. Maya would answer the video call from her bedroom, speaking in a hushed whisper. She said Vanessa was ignoring her, which was the best possible outcome. My parents were busy with Hazel and Wyatt. Maya was just reading books and doing her assignments. I started to relax, just a fraction. I told myself it was only 2 more days. We could make it 2 more days. I was foolish to drop my guard. It was the 4th night of my trip. It was a Thursday. I had just finished a brutal dinner meeting with the clients and dragged myself back to my hotel room. It was 9 o'clock at night in Seattle, which meant it was midnight back home in Ohio. I had already texted Maya earlier, telling her to go to sleep since I would be late. I was taking off my makeup in the bathroom mirror when my phone began to vibrate violently on the marble counter. I glanced at the screen. It was Maya. A spike of adrenaline shot straight into my heart. Maya never called this late. She was a heavy sleeper. I snatched the phone and answered on the second ring. Maya? Honey, what's wrong? What I heard on the other end of the line will haunt my nightmares until the day I die. It wasn't just crying. It was the frantic, hyperventilating sobbing of a terrified child. Mom, she gasped, her voice trembling so hard I could barely understand her. Mom, please come get me. Please. I grabbed the edge of the bathroom sink, my knuckles turning white. Maya, breathe. Tell me exactly where you are. I'm outside, she sobbed. I'm sitting on the curb by the mailbox. It's so cold, Mom. I don't have my jacket. The world stopped spinning. The air left my lungs. My 12-year-old daughter was sitting outside in the middle of the night, in the freezing cold. Why are you outside? I demanded, my voice rising to a frantic pitch. Where are Grandma and Grandpa? Aunt Vanessa kicked me out, Maya cried, her teeth audibly chattering through the speaker. She told me to do Hazel's laundry. I said no because I was sleeping. She grabbed me, Mom. She pulled me down the stairs. She opened the front door and pushed me out. She locked the deadbolt. I knocked, but no one is answering. A sound escaped my throat that I didn't know I was capable of making. It was a feral, guttural noise of absolute rage. My sister had laid her hands on my child. She had thrown her into the freezing night. Listen to me very carefully, I said, my voice suddenly dropping into a terrifyingly calm register. Do you have the money I gave you? Yes, she whispered. Good. Stay exactly where you are. Stay in the light of the street lamp. I am calling Fiona right now. She will be there in 5 minutes. Do not move. I hung up the phone. My hands were shaking so violently I dropped the device twice before I managed to dial Fiona's number. My best friend answered groggily, But the moment I screamed that Maya was locked out on the street, she didn't ask a single question. I heard her grabbing her car keys before she even hung up. I paced the hotel room, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. 5 minutes later, Fiona texted me a photo of Maya sitting safely in the passenger seat of her car, wrapped in a blanket. Maya was safe. Now it was time for war. I sat on the edge of my hotel bed, staring at the wall. The initial panic had passed, entirely replaced by a cold, calculating fury. I picked up my phone and dialed my parents' house line. It rang 4 times before someone picked up. It was Vanessa. She sounded annoyed, her voice thick with sleep. "What?" she snapped. "You put your hands on my daughter," I said. My voice didn't shake. It was dead and flat. Vanessa scoffed loudly into the receiver. "Oh, please. The little princess is throwing a tantrum. I asked her to help out around here, and she got disrespectful. She needed a timeout to learn her place. She can sleep on the porch and think about her attitude." "She is 12 years old," I said, every word dripping with venom. "And this is my house. You threw her out of the house that I pay for." "It's Mom and Dad's house," Vanessa shot back smugly. "And they agreed with me. Now stop calling, you're waking up my kids." She hung up. I immediately called my mother's cell phone. She answered on the first ring. She knew it was me. "Clara," she started, her voice defensive right out of the gate. "Don't overreact. Vanessa was just trying to teach Maya a lesson about family contributions. Maya was very rude to her." I gripped the phone so hard the screen threatened to crack. "Did you watch her do it?" I asked. "Did you stand there and watch your golden child drag my daughter out the front door and lock her in the freezing cold?" There was a long, heavy silence on the line. The silence was the only answer I needed. They had stood there and done absolutely nothing. Then my mother spoke. And the words she said severed the final, decaying thread that connected me to her. "Maybe it's better this way, Clara," she said, her voice cold and hard. "You're always causing tension. You're always making Vanessa feel bad about her situation. Maybe you and Maya should just find somewhere else to live. You don't really fit here anymore." I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I didn't curse at her. I just said, "You are absolutely right, Mother. We don't fit." I ended the call. I didn't shed a single tear. The woman sitting in that hotel room was not the desperate 18-year-old whose college fund was stolen. She was not the guilty single mother trying to buy a family. She was a woman who had just realized her true power, and she was going to burn everything to the ground. I opened my laptop. I didn't care about the client meeting the next morning. I didn't care about Mrs. Harrington. I booked a first-class ticket on the 1 in the morning red-eye flight back to Ohio. I threw my clothes into my suitcase. I was going home, and I was going to collect my debts. My flight landed in Ohio at 6 in the morning. The sun was barely rising, painting the sky in bruises of purple and gray. I took a taxi straight from the airport to Fiona's house. When I walked into Fiona's living room, Maya was asleep on the sofa, clutching a throw pillow. Her face was pale, and there were dark, exhausted circles under her eyes. Fiona was sitting in the armchair, drinking coffee. She looked up at me and shook her head. Fiona whispered that it was worse than I thought. She told me Maya had confessed everything in the car ride over. For weeks, whenever I wasn't looking, Vanessa had been treating Maya like a literal servant. She made Maya do Hazel and Wyatt's laundry, clean their bathroom, and fetch them snacks. And my parents had allowed it to happen. They watched their golden child abuse my daughter, and they chose to look the other way. I knelt by the sofa and gently brushed the hair out of Maya's face. I kissed her forehead. I promised her she would never, ever have to step foot in that house again. I stood up, pulled out my phone, and made 3 phone calls. The first call was to my real estate agent. I explained the emergency and told her I needed my apartment back immediately. I authorized her to offer the current tenants a massive financial buyout to break their lease and move out by the end of the week. Money was no object. The second call was to my bank. I completely severed the joint checking account I shared with my parents. I halted all automatic transfers for the mortgage, the electricity, the water, and the internet. I cut off the financial oxygen supply entirely. The third call was to a local moving company. I requested their largest truck and a crew of 4 strong men, offering double their hourly rate for immediate, same-day service. By 9 in the morning, the moving truck was idling outside my parents' house. I knew Vanessa's routine. She always left the house at this time to go get her expensive morning coffee and drop Hazel and Wyatt at a local play center. I walked up the porch steps, unlocked the front door with my key, and propped it wide open. The moving crew followed right behind me. My parents were sitting at the kitchen table, drinking tea. When they saw me walk in with 4 burly men in uniform, my father dropped his mug. It shattered on the linoleum. "Clara? What are you doing?" my mother shrieked, standing up so fast her chair tipped over. I ignored her completely. I pulled a thick folder out of my purse. Inside were the original receipts for every single item I had purchased for this house over the last 3 years. I turned to the foreman of the moving crew. I pointed to the kitchen. "Take the refrigerator. Take the dishwasher. Take the washing machine and the dryer from the laundry room." I walked into the living room and pointed. "Take the television. Take the sofa. Take the armchairs." My parents began to panic. My father stepped forward, holding his hands out, begging me to stop. He said they needed the refrigerator, that their medication was in there. I looked at him with dead eyes. "Take your medication out," I said. "The fridge belongs to me. I have the receipt. If you try to stop these men, I will call the police and have you arrested for theft." My mother started sobbing hysterically. She fell to her knees, grabbing my coat, pleading with me. She asked me how they were supposed to wash their clothes, how they were supposed to live. I looked down at her, the woman who had told me I didn't fit in her family just 9 hours prior. "You can wash your clothes by hand in the sink," I said coldly. "And as for how you live, you can ask Vanessa, since she's the one you chose." It took the crew exactly 1 hour to strip the house bare. When they carried the massive refrigerator out the front door, leaving a gaping, dusty hole in the kitchen cabinetry, I felt a wave of absolute, terrifying satisfaction. I walked out the door, leaving my parents crying in an empty, echoing living room. I didn't look back. The tenants in my apartment accepted the buyout, and within 5 days, Maya and I were back in our true home. The moment we walked through the door of our apartment, the heavy, suffocating weight I had carried for 3 years instantly vanished. The silence in our apartment was beautiful. There were no screaming children, no passive-aggressive remarks, no smell of cheap vanilla covering up decay. It was just me and my daughter, safe and secure. The fallout from my departure was spectacular, and I watched it unfold from a very comfortable distance. The phone calls and text messages started the very next day. First, they were angry. Vanessa left me unhinged voicemails, screaming that I was a monster, that the food in the house was spoiling, and that her children were traumatized by the lack of television. I saved every single voicemail to a special folder. Then, when the first of the month arrived, the tone changed to sheer desperation. Without my massive financial injection, the bank immediately moved to foreclose on the house. The utilities were given shut-off notices. My mother sent me dozens of text messages, pictures of past due bills, begging me to just pay the mortgage one last time. She tried to guilt-trip me, saying they were going to be homeless. I didn't answer a single message. I blocked their phone numbers. I blocked them on all social media. I completely erased them from my digital life. Through Fiona, who still lived in the neighborhood and heard the gossip, I learned exactly how the mighty had fallen. The bank did not show mercy. Within 6 months, the house was foreclosed and seized. My parents lost the only asset they had ever owned. Because they had ruined their credit taking out loans for Derek, they couldn't get a decent apartment. They were forced to rent a tiny, run-down 2-bedroom unit in a dangerous part of town. And Vanessa? The golden child did exactly what parasites do when the host dies. She abandoned my parents. She realized they had no more money to offer her, so she quickly latched onto a new man, some guy she met at a bar, and moved herself and her kids into his house, leaving my elderly parents to fend for themselves in poverty. Sometimes, late at night, I sit on the balcony of our apartment and think about them. I think about my father's back aching because he has to wash dishes by hand again. I think about my mother realizing that she sacrificed her only loyal daughter for a sister who tossed her aside the second the money ran out. But I don't feel pity. I feel justice. The money I was spending on their mortgage and Vanessa's lifestyle is now going straight into a high-yield trust fund for Maya. We travel. We go to the theater. We are happy. Maya has completely blossomed, the trauma of that horrible night fading into a distant memory. She joined the chess club at her middle school, and she beats her opponents without needing an old man to let her win. I took the broken pieces of my life, the trauma they inflicted on me, and I used it to build a fortress for my daughter. I survived them when I was 18, and I destroyed them when I was 36. Some of my distant relatives say I went too far by letting my parents lose their home and taking away the very appliances they relied on. They say family is still family, no matter how deeply they wound you. But as I watch my daughter sleep peacefully in our own home, safe from their toxicity, I feel absolutely no remorse. Am I wrong for stripping them of everything and leaving them in the cold, just like they did to my daughter? Thank you for listening to my story. If you haven't subscribed yet, please hit that button and ring the bell to support the channel. Leave your thoughts in the comments below. I'd love to hear your verdict.